It was the kind of night that doesn't belong in this world. The wind was whispering through the old oak trees that bordered my property like a warning I couldn't quite hear. The sky, usually full of stars, was choked with heavy clouds that seemed too low, too close. It was a Thursday, one of those midweek days where nothing happens, but the air itself felt off. I should have known that something was wrong. But how could I? I'd moved to this place, a forgotten little town in the middle of nowhere in northern Wyoming, about 6 months ago. My job had allowed me to work remotely, so I figured why not escape the noise of the city. The peace was what I craved. But the quiet here wasn't like anything I'd ever known before. It wasn't just the absence of cars or voices. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting. My house was old, built at least 100 years ago, standing stubbornly on the edge of a field that stretched out into a forest. The locals called it the Hollow. I thought it was just because of how the valley dipped between two ridges. But now I think there was something more to it. The first thing I noticed when I arrived was that the nights were pitch black. The kind of black that feels like it's swallowing you whole. I wasn't used to that. In the city, even at 3 in the morning, there was always light creeping in, bouncing off buildings, the hum of distant traffic. Here, it was just dark. And silent. On that Thursday night, I was sitting at my desk, trying to get some work done. But I couldn't focus. There was this tension in the air. Like when you feel a storm coming, but the sky hasn't broken yet. I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away, louder than usual. Or maybe it was just me. I kept glancing at the window, expecting to see something, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, I was alone. This wasn't the kind of place where things happened. But that didn't stop me from feeling watched. At around midnight, just as I was about to give up on work and head to bed, I heard it. A knock. 3 sharp raps on the front door. My hand froze over the keyboard. Who would be knocking at this time? I hadn't seen a soul in days. And the nearest neighbor was miles away. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined it. The house was old, it made noises. But then it came again. 3 more knocks, just as sharp, just as clear. I got up, slowly, my pulse quickening. The hallway felt longer than usual as I made my way to the front door. I peered through the peephole. Nothing. No one. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct I had screamed to stay away. But I unlocked it anyway, just a crack, and peeked out. The porch was empty. A gust of wind rushed in, carrying the cold with it. It smelled of wet earth and something metallic. I shut the door quickly and locked it, cursing myself for being so jumpy. It was probably just the wind, I thought. Or a branch falling against the house. But then I heard it again. Not at the door this time. It was coming from the back of the house. 3 sharp knocks, like someone was tapping against the glass of the kitchen window. I felt a chill settle deep in my bones. There was no way anyone could be back there. The backyard led straight into the hollow, and there was nothing out there but trees. No path, no road, just dense woods that stretched for miles. Yet the sound was unmistakable. Someone or something was back there. I crept toward the kitchen, every step feeling like it took hours. The house felt colder than it should have, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped, staring at the window from across the room. The curtains were drawn, but they seemed to shift ever so slightly, like there was a breeze outside. But there wasn't supposed to be a window open. With trembling hands, I reached for the curtain and pulled it back in one swift motion. Nothing. Just the backyard, shrouded in darkness. I could barely make out the tree line at the edge of the hollow. The wind had stopped. Everything was still. And then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the trees. It wasn't moving. just standing there, facing the house. From where I was, I couldn't make out any details, just a silhouette, tall and thin, its arms hanging unnaturally long at its sides. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a person? An animal? No. It was neither. The figure took a step forward. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled backward, slamming into the counter. I turned and ran, nearly tripping over my feet as I rushed back to the living room. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just seen. Was it real? Could it have been a trick of the light? But I knew better. I locked all the doors and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed the local sheriff. The phone rang once, twice, and then it cut out. The line went dead. I looked at the screen. No service. How could that be? I had a signal earlier. A tapping sound echoed through the house, this time from the window in the living room. I whipped around, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure was closer now. I could see it standing just beyond the porch, still in the shadows, but its shape was clearer. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, its posture too hunched, and its head. It wasn't right. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the window. My mind raced, searching for an explanation, a reason, but there was nothing. No logic to this. Just pure, unrelenting terror. The tapping came again, louder, more insistent. It was coming for me. I ran up the stairs, not thinking, just moving. My body was on autopilot, driven by the primal need to survive. I reached my bedroom and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. The room was pitch black, but I didn't dare turn on the light. If it could see me, if it knew where I was. I huddled in the corner, clutching my phone, willing it to find a signal. But the screen remained dark. Useless. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that the tapping had stopped. The house was silent again. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. And then, the door handle rattled. I stared at it, frozen in place. The knob turned slowly, as if someone on the other side was testing it. My heart raced, my pulse roaring in my ears. The door was locked. It couldn't get in. It couldn't. The handle stopped turning. For a moment, everything was still. The air was heavy, thick with the kind of quiet that presses down on you, suffocating. And then, without warning, the door creaked open, just a crack. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body felt paralyzed, every muscle locked in place. A shadow shifted in the hallway, just beyond the doorway. Something was out there, watching. Waiting. And then, it stepped into the room. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence, looming, oppressive. It filled the space with a darkness that went beyond the absence of light. This was something else, something alive. Slowly, it moved toward me, its footsteps soft but deliberate. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only watch as it drew closer, its long, twisted form bending and shifting in ways that defied logic. Its movements were wrong, like a puppet with broken strings. It stopped just a few feet from me, and for the first time, I saw its eyes. They weren't human. They were deep, endless voids, pulling me in, swallowing me whole. I couldn't look away. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in a low, guttural sound that reverberated through my bones. It wasn't asking for anything. It wasn't trying to communicate. It was claiming me. I don't remember what happened next. I don't remember how I escaped, or if I even did. All I know is that I woke up the next morning in the field behind my house, the sun just beginning to rise. My clothes were torn, my body bruised, but I was alive. The figure was gone. I moved out of that house the next day, packed whatever I could fit in my car and left without looking back. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Who would believe me? but I can still feel it, that presence, like it's watching, waiting for the moment when I let my guard down again. Because I know, deep down, that it's not finished with me. Not yet. It started with the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and unnerving in the dead of night. I lived in a small apartment on the second floor of a rundown building in the outskirts of a town in Oregon. The kind of place where the walls are thin, and you know exactly when your neighbor gets home, argues, or even watches TV too loudly. But these footsteps, these were different. They didn't belong to anyone who lived there. It was a Wednesday night, and I had been sitting on the couch, flipping through channels aimlessly. I was about to head to bed when I heard them for the first time. They started at the end of the hallway outside my door, moving toward my apartment in a slow, measured pace. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed unnaturally, filling the quiet of the night. I paused, remote in hand, and listened. I expected to hear one of my neighbors shuffle by, maybe the old woman from 2B returning late from a walk or the man in 3D coming down the stairs. But the footsteps stopped right outside my door. There was a long silence. I waited, not daring to move. Whoever it was didn't knock, didn't jingle their keys or rustle around with bags. They just stopped. I stood up quietly and crept to the door, my hand hovering over the peephole. The hallway light outside flickered weakly, casting faint, erratic shadows beneath the doorframe. My pulse quickened, and I peered through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Not a single person in sight. I stood there for a few moments, staring through the glass, waiting for anything to appear. But there was only silence. Trying to shake off the unease creeping through me, I double-checked the lock on my door and went to bed. It was probably just a building settling or someone walking around on the floor above, I told myself. But that wasn't the last time I heard it. The next night, the footsteps returned. Same time, same slow, deliberate pace, as though whoever or whatever it was knew exactly where I was. I stayed up later than usual that night, engrossed in a movie, trying to push the strange encounter out of my mind. But around 1:30 a.m., I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Closer this time. Right outside my door. My body tensed, and I turned the TV volume down. The footsteps had stopped. The silence in the apartment felt oppressive, like a weight pressing down on me. I wanted to look through the peephole again, but something told me not to. I didn't want to see what was out there. I lay awake that night, listening for the slightest noise, but there was nothing else. Just that same, unnerving silence. Over the next few days, things started to get worse. The footsteps became a nightly occurrence. Always the same time, always the same slow, eerie rhythm, and always stopping right outside my door. But now, I started hearing something else, something that sent chills through my entire body. Breathing. It was faint at first, like someone standing just inches away from my door, inhaling and exhaling in slow, deliberate breaths. The sound was so quiet, so soft, that I wasn't even sure I was hearing it at first. But as the nights went on, it became louder. Closer. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I began dreading the nights, dreading the sound of those footsteps, that breathing. It felt like something was waiting, watching me, biding its time. One evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting on the couch, waiting for the inevitable sound, when I heard the footsteps again. This time, I was ready. I rushed to the door and threw it open, determined to confront whoever or whatever was outside. But the hallway was empty. There wasn't a soul in sight. The light flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the walls, but no one was there. I stood in the doorway, feeling a mix of frustration and fear, when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A dark stain on the floor, just outside my apartment. I knelt down to get a better look, and my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just any stain, it was a trail of something wet, leading down the hallway toward the stairs. Blood. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the crimson streaks. They weren't fresh, but they hadn't been there before. I followed the trail, my mind racing as it twisted and turned down the hall, leading straight to the basement door. I hesitated. I had never gone down to the basement in all the time I had lived there. It was old, damp, and smelled of mildew. The few times I'd seen it, the place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Tenants usually stored old boxes or broken furniture down there, but no one ever stayed for long. There was something about the basement that felt wrong. But I had to know. With my heart pounding in my chest, I slowly made my way to the basement door and pulled it open. The hinges creaked, and the smell of damp earth wafted up, stronger than I remembered. A single, dim light bulb flickered at the top of the stairs, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The blood trail led down into the darkness. I stepped carefully, my hand gripping the railing as I descended into the basement. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air growing colder the further I went. The light above flickered again, and I froze, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the dimness. At the bottom of the stairs, the blood trail ended abruptly, leading to an old wooden door tucked away in the far corner of the room. The door was cracked open, and from within, I could hear something faint like a rustling sound or the scrape of metal on concrete. I reached out, my hand trembling as I pushed the door open. Inside, the room was small, barely more than a closet. Dust coated the floor and shelves, and the smell of decay hung thick in the air. But what drew my attention was the figure in the center of the room. It was a man, if you could call it that anymore. His body was hunched, twisted, and wrong in ways that made my stomach churn. His skin was pale, stretched tight over bone, and his eyes were wide and glassy, staring straight ahead. He didn't seem to notice me. He just stood there, swaying slightly, his lips moving in a silent chant. And then I saw the walls. Scrawled across every inch of the room were symbols. Strange, jagged shapes that looked almost like letters, but not in any language I had ever seen. They were drawn in fresh blood. I could smell it. Before I could react, the figure in the center of the room suddenly turned toward me, his eyes locking onto mine. His mouth twisted into a grin, lips parting to reveal rotting teeth. He took a step toward me, and the air grew colder still. I stumbled back, heart racing, and turned to run. My feet pounded up the stairs, and I could hear him following, those same slow, deliberate footsteps echoing behind me. Tap. 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 I reached the top and slammed the basement door shut, locking it. The footsteps stopped. But I could still hear him. That breathing. Just on the other side. I never went back down there again. In the days that followed, I packed up my things and left the apartment, breaking my lease without a second thought. I moved across town, to a place where the walls were thicker and the nights were filled with noise. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is quiet, I still hear it. Tap. 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 And I know he's still waiting.